Great turnout. It sure is good to see you. By the way, if you happen to watch these little talks on YouTube or anybody that's watching, disclaimer, these spiritual talks are suggested servings only, and do with them what you will. There is no effort to convince, cajole, or to force anybody's opinion. They're simply explorations and ideas so that we all can synthesize a healthier understanding of our own understanding. Disclaimer issued. My lawyer asked me to say that. All right, I have a quote for you today. St. Augustine, he's a saint that I've not studied much, but I've come across this quote many times. He says in his Confessions, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless unless and until they rest in you. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." That sounds a lot like a saint, doesn't it? Like a mystic, somebody with a deep longing, somebody with a deep restlessness inside of their heart. One of my most interesting spiritual meetings that I go to is every Sunday night. And it's a recovery meeting, but in this meeting, it's called Spiritual Fitness. And we don't talk so much in this particular meeting about not drinking no more. Will always be an important topic, of course. But in this meeting called Spiritual Fitness, we talk about our principles, practices, and ideas that we use to remain spiritually fit. And there's a great deal of variety and differential and a host of different ways of looking at it. But there seems to be a consensus that being spiritually fit is much like being physically fit. There has to be a consistent, ongoing, daily practice. Otherwise, our fitness will fade. And when our spiritual fitness fades, the quality of life degrades along with it. When spiritual fitness improves, the quality of life naturally upgrades and uplifts. And it's fascinating to be with other like-minded people, and yet people who see things from so many different angles. Anyway, St. Augustine just said, "Lord God, Source, you made us for you, and until I return, I'm going to feel restless, irritable, discontent, as though something is missing." Now, just this very notion of the word spiritual, anytime I talk to people, and I talk to a lot of people, and if I hear from them that they're a spiritual person, I often ask them to define it. And what does it mean to be spiritual? Well, I know after much thinking upon it myself, to be spiritual for me means the primacy of consciousness. The primacy of consciousness. Consciousness comes first. All the people, places, and things and material in this very material universe, as wonderful and as glorious and as awesome as it is, it's secondary or peripheral to what's primary, and consciousness comes first. Well, if consciousness comes first, we're material beings living in this spiritual world, and there's a sense of something's missing, or an angst, or we have a God-sized hole, or we keep accomplishing or acquiring things, but it never quite hits the spot. It's as though we have a hunger or a thirst inside of us that goes continuously unfulfilled. And the only thing that seems to fill it is not necessarily material things, not to dismiss or discount that, but it's more qualitative. It's feelings of love or meaning or purpose or joy. And we're all born material beings. We all show up on this plane of existence in our tiny baby body, and then we learn from others, and then we grow up and we have these instincts: got to get a house, got to get a food, got to get a mate, got to make some kids, got to get some cash, got to get enough cash that lasts forever. You got to get a big pile of goodies, and then you got to make sure your pile is bigger than other people's pile. And then you got to defend and protect your pile and get a lot of security cameras so other people can't get their hands on your stack, Jack. You know what I mean? And so this material fervor or mania that we live in oftentimes obscures what it feels like or what it means to be spiritual. Now, some people just ain't spiritual. That's just the facts. So some people are material minded people, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not my job to judge material. In fact, I'm really glad that there are material minded people who live on that plane. They tend to be good at what they do, they're successful, they take care of business, and they get the stuff done, they get her done. And material minded people are great. And maybe that's just the way that they're born and their disposition. And that's fine. But if you say that you're a spiritual person, sooner or later, we have to cross the line between being a material minded person and becoming a spiritual person. What does that mean? It means there'll be a transition between living as a material minded person, mostly for the stuff, the people, places, and things, and making a transition into this spiritual life. And when that transition comes, whenever that comes for any soul, it's going to be a difficult time. It's a challenge to move from being a material minded person to becoming a spiritual minded person. And as the great spiritual author Emmett Fox says, it's during this transition from being a material person to being a spiritual person, where consciousness comes first, that we feel like we're kicked about like a football. We're unfitted from the material world, and yet we don't have our roots firmly firmly developed into the spirit world. We don't know how to use consciousness. We don't know how to use prayer and intention. We don't know how to seek first the inner nectar rather than buzzing around like crazed bees to flowers, keeping to try to get enough. And so it's a phase going from the material world, but we can't, sooner or later, there has to be a realization we can't live on the fence. We can't be double minded about it. We can't kind of be spiritual and kind of be material. This is not to dismiss or to discount the importance of the material world. It's just seek first the kingdom of heaven, and then everything else will follow. And oftentimes we just have to be reminded about it. And I was reminded about it today from the quote of St. Augustine that said, "You have made us for you, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we repose in thee." And so chances are, if you're listening to this, you're a spiritual person. You have a hunger and thirst for more. And as we remind ourselves that the real satisfaction comes from within, then we'll begin to be fulfilled in that way. Anyway, food for thought, disclaimer issued. Have a beautiful day and seek what really matters. I'll see you tomorrow.